Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Penalty Loop Podcast, a podcast about biathlon by Jordan Gottschalk from Penalty Loop and a regular guest, RJ Weiss from Biathlon Analytics. Tara, welcome to our show. Is it Tara or Tara?
It's Tara. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your invite.
Yeah, no, it's we were just in the introduction saying that your story is quite interesting, and as I was preparing for this interview, I learned a couple of more things that make me want to ask even more questions.
Oh,
so, no, it's all good. I'm really curious where your roots are with regards to your last name. It's not an everyday last name.
I believe the Geraghty is, well, I know the Geraghty is all Irish, and I believe the Moats is like Swiss German, but I really don't know that much about that side of the family.
Okay. And then it goes back a long way. Have you ever traced it down? Or
I haven't been able to trace the Moats down much at all, honestly, but Geraghty, I think I am like third generation Irish American. So my grandfather grew up in the Bronx, but his father grew up in Ireland.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
Classic American story.
Yeah, pretty much. Just a melting pot of a little bit of everything. I think there's some Norwegian on my mom's side, but no one's really sure how it got there. They did like the ancestry DNA stuff. Mm-hmm. So who knows? We all have a little bit of everything. That's where the ski itch
comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And so, was your family really a sports family when you grew up?
Yeah. I mean, so where I grew up in Vermont, and pretty much anywhere in Vermont, is forest and lakes, a lot of dirt roads. The population of Vermont is under 1 million people. So I grew up in a very rural environment where pretty much the best thing and the most entertaining thing to do growing up was to do sports. So whether it was running or mountain biking, canoeing, kayaking, swimming, just general adventuring, that's what we did. And my mom was a bike mechanic for several different bike shops, I think a couple of teams at some different points. And she was also an outdoor educator. So I just kind of grew up outside. I have some of my earliest memories are like going to bike festivals and riding my like tiny little bike around while she worked. So I kind of grew up around racing, grew up doing sports, and it was really a way of life.
And then at some point, you had the same dream as every other kid that you wanted to fly, but then most other kids just went on from there, and you're like, no, I'm actually going to do it.
Right. So at 9, well, I mean, I loved skiing. I loved going fast. I was one of those kids that like would jump off anything. There's like a childhood story that at one point my mom was doing dishes and she looked out the kitchen window and I was taking my like little bike to the top of my slide and about to go down it. And she was like, oh boy, time to take the training wheels off. But that was just like kind of the kind of kid I was. So ski jumping was kind of a natural for me. And I started when I was 9 years old and really never looked back. I really enjoyed it.
But was there like a ski jump next to your house then? Or like, did you just ski down the roof? Or
I started cross-country skiing with the junior Nordic program at Fort Sayre in Hanover, New Hampshire, very close to Dartmouth College. Mm-hmm. Where many U.S. cross-country Olympians have gone to college. And they have a small jump there that they run. And after I'd been in the Nordic program for 1 year, I saw the ski jumps and I thought it would be really fun to try.
So how did that conversation go with your parents? Were you just like, hey, I want to jump off of that? And they were like, great, go ahead and do it.
I think it was really with my mom because my dad never really cared what I did. But my mom was just like, well, okay, at least someone else is supervising you to jump off things and it's not my job. And I get another hour of skiing at Oak Hill. So that worked really well for her. She was like, well, sounds good. I don't think she really ever thought it would stick, though. I think she just thought it was something that I would try.
It's nice. Like, it's like very, it's like an open-ended support. Like, hey, you want to try this? All right, go for it. See if you like it. I think that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
That she allowed you to explore and kind of find something like that.
No, for sure. My mom definitely like encouraged me to try all sorts of sports and just to be outside in general, which I'm really thankful for. And interestingly enough, she was not like overly excited about me starting to race.
Mhm.
And at some point, she put a limit on how many sports I could do at the same time and try.
She
It
couldn't
took a
drive you to
while.
all
Don't
of
get
them.
the impression you really listened.
Yeah, I mean, I did though. Like, I think I only competed in two sports growing up, which was cross country and ski jumping. I wasn't like one of those typical high school athletes that did, you know, indoor track and outdoor track and cross country running and cross country skiing and basketball. Like, I only picked like a couple of sports to compete in when I did,
Mhm.
start competing.
Do you remember ever thinking ski jumping is fun, but maybe not for me in the long run? Or have you always felt like, no, this is too
I mean,
cool
I definitely pretty early on realized like the quote unquote like future of ski jumping was pretty uncertain when I started ski jumping. Women weren't in the Olympics. And I mean, to this day, I think the female ski jumpers get paid like 50 cents for every dollar the men make. Like it's still not a great future, but I've always absolutely loved the sport.
All right. And then when you started, you probably, if you had an event, you was mixed with boys. Or was
ski jumping, where I grew up, there was always a girls and boys class. Even where I grew up, there was always a girls and boys class in Nordic Combined, which was really cool.
Wow. So how old would you have been in those those early events? Like
10 to 13.
Okay, so we're talking about like late elementary school into middle school. That is, I'm just trying to think about like that you would have enough boys and girls who were interested and able to do the competition. It's really neat.
I mean, there was like a good between Fort Sayre Nordic and Lebanon Outing Club, and then also some of the clubs that would sometimes come over from New York, the New York Ski Education Foundation, NICEF. There was like a nice little group of kids who were competing in it, and it wasn't really until I was older that I realized that like there was a problem with equality and not allowing women to do Nordic Combined or ski jumping. And I grew up just doing small Nordic competitions, which was really a gift now that I look at that with more hindsight.
Although you say small, but I looked at the FIS ski website, and I'm pretty sure I found in 2005 you did a official FIS ski jumping competition, which was 12 years old. That's that's right. I was pretty young. I didn't really have a legal suit, but I had been jumping the Lake Placid K90 meter hill, which is a normal size Olympic hill for those people who don't know that much about ski jumping. So I'd been training on it in Lake Placid, like you said, 11 or 12 years old. I think I was 12 years old. And my coach decided it would be just good experience to start. And maybe not, like, I think I only did one round of the 2-round competition, but just for experience and to get a taste of like what international ski competitions were like. I just kind of joined. So. And so you say 90 meter, is that 90 meters above kind of the flat part of the landing, or is it 90 meters length from where you
So
start?
the way ski jumps are measured, and also it's not technically called K anymore, it's called hill size. A ski jump is measured for how far you go before, or how far you can go before the hill flattens out to where you shouldn't land on it anymore. So the steeper ski jump is, the easier it is to land. But at some point it has to flatten out and start becoming the outrun. And where it starts to flatten out is called the K point. And where it is really like sort of the last optimal place for you to land is the hill size. If you're landing over hill size, you're landing on a very flat surface. And it's probably not going to feel that great on your knees and your back.
Right. Yeah. Did you watch like the 4 ski jump tournaments? I don't know what's called in English, the Fjellsjansen.
Or 4 hills.
Around New Year's, or 4 hills? Yeah.
Yeah. I usually tune in every year. I've always wanted to go, but it's in that crunch period of time where, usually in Europe, pretty close by to a competition, but we have like really important competitions coming up, and being out late at night, not getting us sleep around a lot of people and drinking is just like unfortunately not really part of the plan, even though that makes me sound like a super lame Nordic skier. That is the reality of racing all season.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So as you're growing up, at some point you had to start shooting. Were you always shooting and you just combined it? Or did you decide, hey, I want to try biathlon. I need to learn how to shoot?
I grew up in a pretty rural environment. A lot of my neighbors hunted like deer and stuff and turkeys. I had definitely done a little bit of shooting. It wasn't a regular thing for me. I blew out my knee when I was 16 and had complications from the ACL surgery, and sort of like decided to take a step back from ski jumping. And I'd always wanted to try biathlon, but because I suddenly had more time on my hands because I wasn't ski jumping, that's sort of when I decided to get into biathlon. That year it coincided with the youth and junior world championship team trials being in Jericho, Vermont. So that was actually my first ever biathlon winter competition, was those trials. And somehow I qualified. I really have no idea. I was not a good shooter when I first started out. So I also hadn't shot that much, or like, I think I had a club rifle that wasn't really fit to me. I had done some camps in the summer, but I didn't really live near a range. And then suddenly I found myself like headed to the Czech Republic for Junior World Championships, which is, I think, like kind of unimaginable. If you tell that to a Norwegian or a German or like someone from Finland, if you tell that story, they're just like, what? Like that was your second ever biathlon race, was just Junior World Championships. But yeah, it was. So a little bit strange, but that was my introduction.
How well do you remember those races?
Fairly well.
Yeah. I mean, it had to just be like, did it even hit you like how cool that was, or at the time that you're just a kid, right? And it's just like, I'm just doing this,
Oh, for sure. Because even though I had international starts before when I was quite young as a ski jumper, that was my first trip to Europe. So that was my first trip competing at a like international level, like wearing Team USA uniform, and it was very memorable and very exciting.
That was crazy times.
It really is.
No, it's just like, how was it to be in an environment where people actually love ski jumping? And because you had kids around you in the States as well, but where you can just see there's crowds and there's actual interest at a larger scale.
It still hits me today when I go to Europe how much people value Nordic sports, whether it's ski jumping, Nordic Combined, or biathlon. If I go to someone on the street in a small city in the US and ask them what one of those sports are, they really have no clue. They don't know, and they don't really care about obscure Nordic sports in the Northeast. And then you're walking down the street in Vienna or Helsinki or Stockholm, and everyone knows what those sports are. Right. And if you tell them like I'm a biathlete, they'll know, and they'll ask like if they saw you on TV, which is just, it's such a crazy difference between the US and most of Europe.
Yeah. It's, and do you think we'll ever get there here in North America?
I think definitely like having some big stars like Jessie Diggins has made the popularity go up a lot. And in my lifetime, the popularity has gone up massively, which is really cool to see. But no, I don't think we'll ever reach the same as Europe. But I think there's a lot more potential in the US to raise awareness about the Nordic sports. And I think that's really cool.
Is it also the part that you liked about, like, ski jumping, biathlon, Nordic, they're very small sports? Is that something you like over, I don't know, soccer or?
I don't think I really ever thought about it. And like biathlon didn't really seem small, like when you're at the World Championships and the crowd is so loud that you can't hear yourself think. But I mean, I live in a very rural area, so whatever sport I did would seem quote unquote small. So for me, I really think of that growing up until I was racing at the World Cup in Europe and realizing that it's very different than the US.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever considered moving there?
I did live in Sweden for a year. I was lucky enough to be an exchange student at the Sollefteå Sports Gymnasium, the same school that Sebastian Samuelsson and Hanna Öberg and Anna Magnusson and many, many other sports stars from Sweden attended. And I learned a huge amount, and I'm really thankful for my time there. I definitely did think about just moving there and never looking back, but financially that was just not an option for me.
Right. And is that one of those schools where they support a sporting athlete's life while you're also studying? Is that kind of the idea?
Right. So the day program for the school there was really pretty cool. It was very integrated in a very normal public school. So you would have training before or after classes, and some afternoons the sports students would have off to do sports. So like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, your classes stopped at 12. Many of the sports students took 5 years to complete high school instead of 4 years. But other than that, they did just normal classes in a public high school, which I thought was really cool because that's not something we really have in the US. Right. If you want to go to a sports school, it's usually super expensive, and it's really, you're only with other sports students. You're not with sort of non-sport individuals.
Right. Yeah, and we still don't have that, I think, here, right? Like we have
not in the same way.
Like you said, for expensive ones, but
yeah. So
and then, go ahead.
No, please, RJ.
No, I was just wondering about your transition to the Nordic Combined, or was it also kind of a natural? You like skiing, you like jumping.
Yeah, so I could ski at a high level. I had been doing biathlon for 4 years as a junior, but just not really having shooting support and also not living near a range. So I never, even though I was doing biathlon, except for my time in Sweden, I never could consistently get to a range and shoot, which meant that it was really hard to develop to a consistent shooter.
Right.
Because I just could not get the time on the range with good coaching. So I went to Sweden, I came back, and there wasn't really a junior group for me to train with. And there wasn't really funding. It was my last year as a junior. There wasn't really funding for those athletes who are done being a junior, but not on the senior national team. At the same point in time, I got mononucleosis, and I didn't know that I had it. And my skiing got really slow all of a sudden. And that just kind of intersected at a point in time when my knee felt good after the surgeries that I had when I was younger, and the nationals were in Lake Placid. So I did ski jumping nationals in the fall of, I don't know, I think it was 2014. And I did pretty well, and the coach invited me to go to some international competitions, and that was just an opportunity that I kind of just went for because my biathlon future at that time was not looking that great.
And then you were doing ski jumping. Was it pretty much full time for a little bit, or
completely. I was on the ski jumping World Cup for 4 years. There was no Nordic Combined for women at the time internationally. I think my first World Championships, I came in 18th place, like the first winter after I switched to full-time ski jumping. And I did really miss training endurance and being on cross-country skis, and some of the just lifestyle of being a ski jumper I really struggled with. A lot of their competitions are in cities where there is no snow, and the only snow you see is at the ski jumps. And I learned a lot. I really learned how to be an international competitor those first years on the ski jumping World Cup circuit. And I had an incredible time, but I did always feel like something was missing. And the coaches that we had on the US team at that time were pretty old fashioned. So that they did not want me to cross country ski or really run that much because they felt like it would impact my explosive power and like impact my jumping negatively.
Right.
It's interesting, 'cause I would imagine that has probably changed pretty significantly in the last few years.
I think it depends what team you're on. And sort of like the philosophy of the coaches. And for sure, just to be clear, like if you do a ton of endurance hours, it will affect your explosive power. But we're not talking like, 14-hour weeks here. We're talking like an hour run or an hour Nordic ski here and there with all my other ski jumping training. And it was definitely interesting because, ski jumping, you want to be light, you want to be strong, you want your strength to weight ratio to be very high. But at the same time, these coaches with the very old fashioned philosophy didn't really want to let their female athletes run or ski or do aerobic activities that much.
I guess it takes time away from training on the ski jumping itself. But is ski jumping, other than it seems a sport to me where women and men should be very close to each other in performance.
They are a lot closer in performance than many, many other sports.
Mm-hmm.
So for sure, the vast majority of competitions, women are a little bit behind the men in terms of which bar start they start from, how much speed they have. Although it really is getting quite close with the high level that women's ski jumping is at. Like very, very, very close if you compare it to other sports.
Mm-hmm.
Have they ever done races where they start from the same location?
I'm sure if you look at the FIS results, there'll be some competitions where they start with similar gates. But generally the men start quite a bit lower than the women. But if you have, say you have one of a World Cup medalist for a women's event starting in a FIS Cup, which is a lower level ski jumping circuit. And the men at that FIS Cup are not really at a high level. You'll definitely get the men and the women in that FIS Cup starting at like a very similar gate, like maybe one different or the same.
Right.
But that being said, the top women and the top men are for sure there's a difference still in between. But compared to other sports, it's like nothing, right? Like cross country skiing, I think it's like 15% difference. Ski jumping, it's got to be like 3%, something very small between the top men and top women. Ski jumping, like all women's sports, there's a much bigger spread in the field than men's ski jumping. So women's ski jumping will have a bigger difference between the winner and the 30th place individual than a men's field will have between a winner and a 30th place individual. But if you look at sports across the board, that's very true. Because the difference in men's physiology between individuals and women's physiology between individuals is very different. Meaning the difference between men, a field of male competitors, will be much smaller than the difference between a field of female competitors, if that makes sense.
Because it's the physical aspect of ski jumping, is it mostly obviously your push off?
Yeah, it's mostly explosive
your core strength in the air.
Yeah, explosive strength, coordination, and stability in the air.
Because how hard is that to keep that stability? Like, is that really tough on your body, or is it more?
No, it's not. Well, I guess it really depends. Sort of like the weight distribution and your body type. But for me, it was pretty natural.
Right. And you never felt when you got to that 90K top, when you're looking down, you never felt like, what the hell am I doing?
Not really. I think like the first jump every year, we often take a break. We took a break in April, so you wouldn't be on a hill for like from March 30th to like May 1st. And then the first time you climb the tower and you're at the top, you're like, gosh, like this is kind of crazy. Like this is weird. Like, how did people invent this sport? And then you take a jump and you're like, yeah, but it's really fun. And I love flying through the air. And then you just kind of forget about it. And for sure, when I was a junior and you go from like a 48 to a 90, for your first time. Like for sure, you're like it's a really fun combination of like nervousness and excitement. It's sort of like walking into the high school for your first day, you know, like after you're a middle school student.
Sure.
But I was never like deathly afraid or scared at all.
Because I'm pretty sure I saw a picture of you where you were, let's say, in a less than desirable position in the air.
Yeah, I had like an epic fall and the little Hummer K120, and it was televised. So once it's online forever.
Yeah. But you didn't have major injuries from that, or?
Yeah, I have no idea how, but I had like some fractured ribs that I didn't even figure out they were fractured for like 3 weeks. I went to a Nordic Combined competition the next week later. I competed and I was like, oh, my ribs still hurt. And then I went to the hospital, and, you know, the lovely insurance that we have for athletes, I knew that they wouldn't really cover x-rays until I got home in Vermont, because of the insurance I had. So I was like, well, I'll just get x-rays when I go home. And I had competed for 3 days at a Nordic Combined Continental Cup with 2 fully fractured ribs, which is not recommended and not a good thing to do. But that is what happens when you don't have medical support for athletes.
Right.
It's not a funny situation about not having medical
it's not
support.
Funny at all.
But
It's
the fact that you were
at all.
able to do it, I'm laughing almost just out of like just admiration and respect that you were able with 2 fractured ribs to able to still be competing at that level is remarkable.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I think though, like when you have an individual, I mean, we saw this with, I think there was a Slovenian sprinter, Petra. I'm blanking on her last name right now, which is sort of embarrassing, but she had 2 fully fractured ribs, or many fractured ribs, and got an Olympic medal.
Was it the lady in Vancouver?
Yeah.
That fell in the warm-up or something?
Right.
Yeah.
So when you have athletes who have been trained most of their life to ignore pain, it is pretty easy to fall into kind of like the trap of training through a serious injury.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like, if you don't have team doctors who are on the ground, like with a team regularly, maybe you have medical support for a weekend, or you, like, this is something that happens on US teams a lot. Doctors will be there for a weekend. They will volunteer their time for the weekend. An athlete will get hurt, but that doctor doesn't know that athlete's story. They don't know, what prior injuries they've had. So they have to make a snap judgment based on knowing that athlete for like 48 hours. Yep. And that can lead to some serious oversights of medical conditions. And it's not, I can't imagine it would be fun to be a doctor in that position. And it's certainly not fun to be an athlete in that position. But that is the reality of pretty much all national teams in winter sports in the U.S.
And Tara, you might not know this, but so I am a physician, and I have worked with sports, and so I'm not taking offense to anything you said at all. Like I completely 100% support it. And there's one of the problems you run into is that you run into physicians who, like, your responsibility is always supposed to be to the patient. Mm-hmm. But you find physicians who, like, they start prioritizing other things, like return to sport over recovery. Do you know what I mean? And so, and so you have these times where physicians don't know the patients, right? They don't know their athletes. They don't know their stories. They don't know anything else that's going on with them. Like you said, they make a judgment based off of what they're seeing right then. And then you also have physicians who unfortunately are making recommendations that are not in the athlete's best interest. They're in the best interest of maybe the coaches or maybe the federation or maybe just their own as a fan, right? They're making their own, in their own interest.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard. It has to be really hard for team physicians to like say no sometimes.
Yeah.
I was in Olympic qualifying position as a ski jumper for the 2018 games because you start accruing points towards Olympic qualifying spots in the summer as a ski jumper. Your world ranking starts in the summer before the games and goes through the winter, meaning that their summer Grand Prix, getting a top 30 at a summer Grand Prix counts as points towards your Olympic qualifying quota. So that earns you a quota for your country if you're in top, I think for the women, it was top 30. Anyway, I was top 30 in the overall at that time, and I completely fractured my ulna bone because my binding broke in the air as an athlete.
Ugh.
And long story short, I had 2 surgeries. I was operated on by a team doctor who had never done an elbow surgery like this before. And something like 10 weeks later, I was on a ski jump again with a lot of metal in my arm, trying to qualify for the Olympics. And looking back now, that was a horrible choice. But if I break down every individual decision, like the team doctor wanted the best for the team, wanted the best for me. And like, how do you look an athlete in the eye and say, like, you can't have a shot at going to the Olympics? Like, that's an incredibly hard thing to do. And like with all these stories of athletes overcoming, adversity in terms of health issues, it's really hard to say like what you can overcome and what you can't overcome.
Right.
And if I hadn't tried, would I have always like regretted that I didn't try to like compete in those competitions when I had like no business being on a ski jump? Like, I don't know. Like, it's a very, very big gray area.
Yeah.
I definitely, like, now in hindsight, right, 2020, I definitely wish there had been a non-team doctor that like was brought in to just like make some calls.
Yeah.
Or a team doctor that actually traveled with us. But with no funding in the US for medical care, like, these are the situations that happen over and over and over again. And it's not really the individual medical practitioner's fault or the athlete's fault or even the national team's fault. It's just kind of a circumstance that happens because of external factors.
Right.
But it leads to like careers ending, like lives changing, like
Absolutely.
big serious stuff.
Well, and those are the stories you don't hear, right? You hear, like you said, you hear the stories of athletes overcoming, but you don't hear the other side, right?
Right. Well, the only reason I can really talk about this is because I'm not on that team anymore. And frankly, I'll probably receive a bunch of emails saying like, you were talking about like national teams in non-favorable and positive ways, which is you're never supposed to do as an athlete. You're always supposed to represent your team in a positive way because teams are always trying to fundraise and teams are always trying to put their best foot forward. And they have to, right? Like, again, it's not an individual choice. It's not a team choice. It's how the system works. And as an athlete, you have to put like your best foot forward if you want to be on the team. And the NGB as a whole has to put their best foot forward if they want to get corporate sponsors, if they want to show themselves to be like a contender at the Olympics.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate you speaking so openly, even knowing that will be the case. I would spin it in a positive light too. Is that maybe it's not putting the federation in a positive light, but honestly, like, I think it's a plea for more funding, right? It's a reason why there should be more funding, that there are, there are physicians who know you better, who know your story better. So, and that's, like I said, as a physician, that's how I look at it. So hopefully people
and
who
I
hear
will
it
say,
will,
the trips that I have been on with USDA and the medical support that USDA has right now is like many, many, many times better than anything I experienced earlier on in my career, which I think is a massive step. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it is cool to see the awareness being raised.
Yeah. Well,
and that's where, obviously I'm not a physician, but you say positive contributor to the team as an athlete. That's in a way a gray area too, because to me this is a very positive contribution, because you're trying to make sports safer and better for athletes who perform for the national team. So to me that would be a very positive contribution, right? But I know that's again, it's how you look at it.
It's definitely, on small teams, in small sports, it often becomes less of a business decision and more of a personal. I spent my whole life trying to find funds for this team, and it can feel anything that is talked about and spoken about can feel very personal and less about business and sport and more about individuals.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I really appreciate you being that open about it. I bet this is why I think RJ and I really appreciate doing these interviews with athletes, is because there are so many stories like that that we just don't know, that we just don't hear. I think it enlightens us as to like what you guys go through in order for us to be able to enjoy it, that we see what happens on, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We don't see what happens necessarily, all summer long. We don't see what happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Right. So, it's just,
and it's really hard
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have this platform and talk to you both. And it's really hard to bring up tough issues that maybe can be looked at in a negative way. And then also like turn around and share a positive story and have people think that you're being genuine and honest in both ways, which in fact, the vast majority of athletes are being genuine. You can have really tough situation, whether it's like difficult politics on a team or not enough medical support, and then you can race and have the best race ever and have it be like a magical, passionate, like wonderful experience. And that can all take place in the span of 24 hours as an athlete.
Right.
And, when you're talking about social media and you're talking about in the middle of a season, like you don't have the time to share the complex stories in a way that people can process. And, as athletes, we're trying to focus on being athletes. We're not trying to focus on being journalists. And sometimes sharing your story as an athlete comes really naturally to some individuals. They love being on social media. They love sharing their stories. And sometimes that's not something that comes naturally and not something that an individual really wants to put time and effort into.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and part of me thinks too, hopefully not people that are listening to this, but there's also a lot of fans of the sport that just don't want to hear that side, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the American media really enjoys like zero to hero story. And then it seems like they sort of lose interest after that, right? Like they want their next zero to hero story. And that sort of, that mentality often becomes a unconscious bias when you're looking at team selections or outlooks of coaches or fans or supporters. And it's not ever something that's talked about, but it is something that is constantly present.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to something you said just a couple minutes ago too, is that, how some people, that both can be true, right? So it's not all good, it's not all bad. It just is real life, right? That is the way real life is. And I think that I think it's good that we're open to that, right? It's good that we are open to the fact that that it's not all good and it's not all bad, that there are all sorts of shades of gray.
Yeah, and I do think that's what makes the story of sports so good. Like you don't, when you're opening a good book, it's not all like roses and sunshine, right? And I think that if people can be more open to the ups and downs and more accepting of like, this is a story and this is an individual story and we're going to just take it as is, I think it can be like a wonderful experience for the athletes and also for the fans.
Right.
I want to go back to, you were saying you broke your ulnar bone. You had surgery on it. You went back to trying to qualify for the 2018 Olympics, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then so you ended up winning the 2018-2019 Continental Cup, right, for Nordic Combined. So at some point in there, you fully healed up as far as that injury was concerned.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of extra calcium in my elbow.
Okay.
Meaning bone. And
of course,
it doesn't look like a normal elbow. Once you have an injury, you never really go back to the same person you were before that injury, which is something that I have often reminded myself of. Mm-hmm. But after not qualifying for the 2018 Olympics by a couple of points as a ski jumper, I took the end of that season off as a ski jumper and came back the next year as a Nordic Combiner.
What was that decision like? Deciding that you were going to make that transition?
It was pretty easy. I had always wished that there was women's Nordic Combined.
Yeah.
And when FIS decided to have a women's Nordic Combined international circuit, I was beyond excited. It was something that I had hoped for since I was like 15 years old.
Yeah.
So like 10 years plus later, the fact that I got to have that opportunity was truly amazing. And I'm so thankful I got to be part of Women's Nordic Combined, sort of like the start of Women's Nordic Combined internationally. Right. Like that's something that I'm really proud of. And it was amazing to work with FIS as sort of an ambassador for the first Youth Olympic Games and just a spokesperson for the sport, as well as just be part of a small group of competitors who really were the first women to compete for Nordic Combined internationally.
And when you got that news, were you convinced you could win it right away, or?
No, not at all. I knew that I had a shot at being good in Nordic Combined because I had been at a high level in biathlon in terms of skiing and cross country, and then I had been at a high level in ski jumping. So I knew that there couldn't be like that many individuals who were at that high of a level, but I also knew that it was quite possible that there were more people.
Mm-hmm. And was it, I went through the results a little bit. I got the impression that mostly on the skiing part, you really kicked butt.
Yeah, I definitely, as a Nordic Combiner, I was stronger at skiing than ski jumping. Also during that time, like in my last year in Nordic Combined 2021, I was not able to get on a jump very much because of COVID and all the restrictions and the fact that my home hills in Lake Placid were under construction. So it was a real mess. And my jumping really struggled.
Turned out okay. In the end,
yeah.
Combined.
Yeah,
and then
writing your name permanently in the history books of Nordic Combined. Yeah, I think that worked out okay.
Yeah, I think I still sometimes don't really, I can't really believe that I went down in the history books, and it's pretty incredible to just look at my resume and realize that I was only off a podium one time in Nordic Combined, like in all my races.
It's wild, isn't it?
That's crazy.
So you go from being on the top of the sport, and then you decide, I need a new challenge. I want to try biathlon. Or not try, but I want to go back to biathlon.
It wasn't so much a new challenge. It was just that the Nordic Combined life was not sustainable for me. I was on the road about 10 months a year, give or take. And I had to fundraise continuously. And I was also one of the spokespeople for Women's Nordic Combined. I was constantly doing interviews and constantly dealing with gender inequality and also lack of support, despite some people's best attempts to get support for Women's Nordic Combined.
Yeah.
So here we go back to like the national team that's doing the best they can, but still not providing like great support, right? And it's really hard to talk about the fact that you don't have good support while talking about your national team in a positive light. And because Women's Nordic Combined wasn't an Olympic sport, I didn't get IOC or USOPC funding. So I had to do a lot of my fundraising externally. And also the national team didn't get money towards Women's Nordic Combined from the USOPC. So I just had to fundraise out my ears pretty much every day of the year and also train to be the best in the world.
Right.
And somehow you were actually able to do that, which is pretty remarkable.
For a couple of years.
Yeah, which is just that's remarkable. Do you have a good explanation? And I don't think there is one, but I'm going to put you on the spot anyway. A good explanation for why Women's Nordic Combined is not in the Olympics?
The only explanation I have is that the IOC is made up of the majority of men over the age of 60 who are voting. And they have never competed with women. They have never coached women. They have never been around female athletes, and they don't understand the opportunities they're withholding from female athletes.
I think that you said it probably better than I would have.
It's interesting because I have worked with, FIS. I've worked with some members in the IOC, and you talk about the big issue is unconscious sexism. I mean, many of these people on say the IOC committees, right? They've given their whole lives to sport and they care deeply about sport. And a lot of them are really wonderful people, but you don't know what you don't know. In their minds, they don't understand the fact that women's Nordic Combined has to be an Olympic sport. Otherwise the sport will die. And they don't understand that it's one of like the 6 Olympic sports and it's really important to carry on that legacy. And it's really hard to have that conversation and come to someone who has given their life to sport and volunteers countless hours and personal money to go to committee meetings and say to them that they don't understand what they're talking about. It has to be a very delicate conversation, and it has to be done very well and very slowly for there to be significant long-term gains in the sport. Women's ski jumping had the same problem and eventually went to a international lawsuit that gained so much negative media that the IOC had to do something about it. And you could do that with Nordic Combined. But it wouldn't make the sport look good. It would be a lot of money. It would maybe help, maybe not. I mean, if you look back in history at women's ski jumping, it's really, people are divided about whether the lawsuit was a good idea or not. And people are divided about whether it got it into the games or not. But if you aren't going to take the negative route and you want to do it in a positive way, it's a very slow, arduous job to change people's mind about social issues like this.
Right.
And I have to say that, you fought that fight, I mean, as well as anybody. I can't tell you how many interviews I ran across when I was preparing for this interview of, you advocating for why it should be in the Olympics. So, I mean, that also had to be, in addition to the fundraising, in addition to the constant training to be the best of the best. I mean, that had to be exhausting to constantly be fighting that battle as well.
I think you saying it was exhausting is like a really great description of like how I felt being a Nordic Combiner. And it was really mixed, right? Like I had an amazing opportunity and I was best in the world and I was living my dream in many, many ways. And it's always exhausting being on the top of a sport. And I'm not like, I'd never expect to be on the top of a sport and not be like exhausted and continually fighting for that position. But it was something more when you're dealing with gender inequality and lack of funding to that extent. Like one or the other would have been maybe doable, but both, it was just kind of crushing.
And so when you announced you were stepping away from Nordic Combined, I think the tendency was that it was temporarily. Now with it not being in the Olympics, is your focus, like, are you solely focusing on biathlon, or are you also still doing ski jumping since that is on the Olympics? Or
I haven't been off a ski jump in a couple years now. I will definitely never say never. In 2034, it looks like Nordic Combined will hopefully still be in the Olympics and the games will be in Salt Lake City. So it's possible that women's Nordic Combined could be in there. I think I'll be like 40 years old. But Noriaki Kasai won a medal at, I want to say 52.
Good gracious.
So, I mean, I don't want to ever say never. I'll never say never. But right now I'm fully focused on biathlon.
Right.
So what were the conversations like when you made the transition back to biathlon? I mean, did you tell them that you were interested? Did you just, I don't even know how that would work.
First, I made the decision to step away from Nordic Combined. And most of the people who had coached, competed around, or supported me for Nordic Combined really understood why I was making that decision. And then I made the decision to start biathlon. But when I finished Nordic Combined, I didn't really 100% know if I would do marathon skiing or just Nordic skiing, or whether biathlon would work out altogether. And I was able to qualify for international competitions that first winter, like kind of away from Nordic Combined, which then made me sort of decide that I would put biathlon on the front burner and commit to being a full-time biathlete.
Are you still using? Well, you said you had a team rifle when you started.
Mm-hmm.
When did you get your own rifle, and is that the one you're still using, or have you?
I got my
switched?
own rifle coming back to biathlon this time, and I think I got my own rifle. I got my own rifle when I was 16 or 17. No, 18. I got my own rifle, but I didn't have like a custom stock until this time when I came back.
Okay. Did you
So,
get that done in Europe or?
I got the rifle through Lost Nation, who is Ethan Dreisegacker, who is a former competitor, and he now does biathlon. He supplies biathlon rifles and parts in the U.S.
Is it the 3D printing? He does that a lot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he does 3D
Yeah, it looks
printing.
very interesting.
And then I was lucky enough to work with Sandra Briesinger for my stock quite recently.
Nice. Are you working with Lost Nation, like from an athlete's perspective, or is it strictly?
Yeah, for sure.
Just...
I mean, they are a couple miles down the road, and I see Ethan all the time. And if I have something that needs to work done on my stock, he's the first person I go to, and he is an amazing resource to have just a couple miles down the road.
But are you also a resource for him with feedback on his products, kind of thing, or?
I think all the athletes, whether it's the Craft Rig Green Team or like the National Guard team, right, in Jericho, I think he welcomes feedback from pretty much any athlete who uses his designs and products.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen the website a number of times, and I'm really I do biathlon too as an amateur, and always curious to see what he comes up with.
Yeah.
I saw in your data too that I think between 22, 23 and last season, you switched on your prone from left to right. You went to right to left.
Yeah.
Where did that come from, and how do you feel it impacted your shooting?
That came from the fact that my last shot was often, I believe, high in training. And I felt like if I shot that direction, it felt better. And I felt less stuck. And I could have a tighter position and still move across the targets in a fluid way. Also, last season, I was in military training from February to end of July, almost August. And I didn't train biathlon at all. During that period in time, I didn't train aerobically. I didn't train strength training, no shooting, nothing, just military schools and military drills. So I came back in the summer, and then I got a couple weeks of training in, and then got pretty sick with a stomach virus that took a long time to diagnose. And then I had like a month worth of antibiotics. And then I tried to qualify for the season. But really, if I look at my training last summer and last year, I like honestly only had about 4 weeks of training for biathlon. And frankly, I have no idea how I made it through a winter on the road, competing internationally, let alone having like a PR last winter with my best sprint result at World Championships. Right. So I'm incredibly grateful that I had that opportunity. But the fact that I had bad results was not really surprising at all. And I think I switched directions, to go back to your original question, because something about my shoulder and where I was missing targets was made better by going the other way.
Okay. And that was it a coaching comment, or was it from you just feeling?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had your PR at the World Championships. You also had your IBU Cup best finish. Was at the European Championships, not last year, but the year before. What is it about those championships? Why do you do so well when you get there?
I usually set up my training program to do well at Eurochamps.
Yeah.
I also always, as an athlete, have raced myself into shape, meaning the more I race, the faster I get. And I often will try race plans out the rest of the year that I'm are sort of more shoot the moon race plans, meaning like if it all comes together, I'll do really, really well, but are not really like this, not playing the safe game. Whereas at European Championships, I'll pick a race plan that I know has my best shot at doing really well.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Lenzerheide, I had an incredibly slow starting lap and did the first lap in Lenzerheide basically at L3, which is like a threshold pace. And did it at a pace I absolutely knew I would clean prone, and then tried to negative split the race and was able to shoot well standing there, especially because it's a much easier range approach. And I knew that a lot of the field I noticed that if you have an easier range approach, like in Nove Mesto or Lenzerheide, even some of the top athletes often come in too hard and then miss. So like the easier range approaches are often where you have like really good competitors not doing well because they come in too hard. Or it changes something in the way they think about it. So if you can shoot really, really well, then it moves you up the field in a more drastic way.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It's like it trampolines you, it springboards you up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in Lenzerheide, I skied my first lap L3, cleaned my prone, skied really hard the second lap, and then used that downhill into the range in Lenzerheide to really lower my heart rate, and then took a couple extra seconds in standing to try to really set up well, and then was able to hit 4, which is good for me in standing. And yeah, I did really well and still had some gas left over in the last lap, which at altitude with slow snow and the course is degrading, a lot of people do not have a fast lap. So again, even though my last lap was not that fast, it was faster than a lot of the field because of my race plan.
Sure.
And I think something I really like about biathlon is that there is so much room for strategy and technical plays, like in every single race.
Right.
Which I definitely haven't come close to mastered, but a couple of times I've gotten it really right, and it's super rewarding. Like at World Champs, I think I took approximately 2 stone ages to shoot standing, but I knew that if I didn't clean standing, there was no hope at pursuit, and I also knew that my skiing was not in a good place at all because I didn't train all summer. So I just tried to work with what I had, and I had been shooting pretty well prone in training, and I decided to go out hard, and I shot prone well. And then I came into standing into the stadium, and there was an amazing crowd, which was also super fun to do that race and just have that Nove Mesto Numerav crowd there, like every single race, every single lap, just like so excited about watching World Champs. But anyway, I came into the stadium and knew that I was like, well, I cleaned prone, but like it essentially didn't matter, right? I had done that in Oberhof, and I think I came in like 80th place. So I was like, well, unless I can clean or just miss one standing, like it doesn't matter that I just clean prone. So I just like came in really easy, probably dumped a lot of time, took a lot of time to shoot standing, got a really good position, and then hit 4 out of 5 and realized that I was in pursuit position after that. And then, tried to ski really hard. Unfortunately, me skiing really hard last season didn't equal me skiing really fast, just because I didn't have the endurance and the shape that I wanted to. But the fact that I was able to get into a world championship pursuit after that summer of training was due solely to like good wax tech, the course being in good condition, and me having like a plan that really could have also just as easily landed me in last place. But I decided to go with like a risky plan that I knew could go really well versus a risky, like a kind of a sure bet plan that like the corridor of my potential result would be much lower.
Yeah. And
that was, I'm just gonna hold on, RJ. I'm gonna interrupt real quick. That was one of the best like explanations and breakdowns of a race strategy and race plan that I have heard in a long time. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. One thing I really enjoy about racing is making strategic plans and using. I think it's something that a lot of athletes could benefit from. is using like the shape they are actually in on race day to make the plan. Because especially, I don't know if it's just a female athlete thing, but I'm told constantly to be positive and believe in myself, which is true. Like you always want to have a positive outlook, but sometimes it's really important to just realize like I'm skiing really slow. What plan can I make that will enable me to do better and incorporate the shape I am actually in to have the best result I can? And have positivity, but have that positivity really based in reality.
Really brings us back to earlier, right? Where rather than avoiding talking about, a negative thing or not positive, by bringing it up and taking it into consideration for your plan, you actually end up with, a more realistic plan, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's kind of interesting.
And I think
that
if I
at
had
that
to
level,
have like one defining thing as an athlete that I do well, it is that. Like whether it's, when I was younger and I didn't have enough funding to go to all the training camps, go to the training camps that I thought would help me the best, and then mimic training camps at home in the best way I could, or, acknowledge that I am getting over an injury or a sickness and change my program or goals to meet that and to understand that. It really takes sort of ripping the Band-Aid off and looking at a problem straight in its face before you can come up with a positive and fail-safe plan to improve that. And it's really satisfying when you do that and you do it well.
Right. Yeah, like what was it? Hannibal on the DA team. I love it when a plan comes together.
Yes, exactly. Love that.
And what is the plan for us seeing you race in Antholz in 2026?
US Biathlon has a pretty transparent and clear qualification system, where they can discretion a lot of athletes a lot of places and do, but the great thing about US Biathlon is that if you achieve results, you will make teams. So basically just do well on the World Cup and get points, and if that doesn't work, there's an IBU Cup system that they qualify people to the IBU Cup, and you kind of race it out for the last slot on the Olympic team if they do it the way they've done other years. But that's how they've historically done it for the past, I think, 14 years.
And listening to you clearly have a pretty good idea of how to race at Linzerheide, and you will hopefully be racing there this year at a pretty critical time. So hopefully that'll be a pretty big moment too. I mean, I don't know exactly how the point system works, I'll be honest, but hopefully that'll be a pretty big moment for you to put on a bit of a show.
Yeah, we'll see. I think that USBA is really trying to develop its women's team. And they're taking kind of a different strategy, which means that sometimes they put women on World Cup teams where they might not have like the vast resume of results, but they want to just put their faith in them. So we'll see. Maybe I'll be at World Champs, maybe I'll be at IBU Cup. But I think the great thing about biathlon is that the IBU Cup is at an extremely high level.
Oh, it is,
so,
for sure.
If you can get podiums at the IBU Cup level, you are capable of really good results at the World Cup. And that's amazing to me. I have better support and more resources on the IBU Cup as a biathlete than I did when I was best in the world as a Nordic Combiner. Team discretionary decisions and qualification criteria aside, like it doesn't really matter. Like if I am racing as a biathlete on the IBU Cup or World Cup, I can definitely have a lot to improve. And I'm very, very grateful for that opportunity.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're coming into your peak age, right, for biathlon?
Depends who you ask. I was told by Lowell Bailey that I was actually getting a little old to have a lot of potential in biathlon, which was pretty ironic given that he got his world championship medal at, I believe, I may be wrong, in his late 30s. But I think that endurance athletes, as a whole, especially females, often have their better results when they are in their mid-30s. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you just look at the women who have been competing for the overall, and on the World Cup recently, Lisa Vitazzi, notwithstanding, but you look at Tara Leckhoff and Martha Roysland, were in their early to mid 30s, when they were winning the overall. So, you were certainly not at the end, And
it is interesting. I've definitely I think I've, as an individual, have gained kind of faith in my athletic ability as I've gotten older.
Mm-hmm.
But for sure, turning 30, all of a sudden people are asking, are you retiring? Are you going to stop sport? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And for me personally, I finally feel like I figured out a sustainable life that's well balanced where I can be an athlete for a long time. And it's kind of an interesting conundrum. The social pressures of the world definitely feel okay, it's time to stop being an athlete and get on to serious life. Whereas physiologically, I feel like I have more potential than I've ever had before.
Right. Well, it surprised me, and it doesn't surprise me in biathlon, but simply looking at the data, not just your data. I think I wrote an article about 2 years ago about peak age for women. And I know it's generalizing, but it's definitely not 25. And it definitely doesn't say or suggest that by 30 you should hang up the rifle. But
yeah, and I think it's also very skewed in the US because a lot of people, like myself included, don't really take biathlon seriously until they are maybe post-college, or in my case, 17, 18 for a couple years. And then I didn't come back and start full-time until I was 28, 27. So I came back to biathlon after not even touching a rifle for, I believe, was it 10 years? I came back to biathlon, and 3 years later, I have a top 60 at World Champs.
Right.
And then you're telling me that I'm too old to have potential in the sport. And it's well, whatever. I mean, everyone is entitled to their opinions, but it's not if I was a coach and looking at that trajectory, I'd be well, that athlete has potential. But as an athlete across the board in any sport, I'm sort of a roller coaster ride, right? I talk about strategies and plans, and I'll often take a risky strategy or plan and fall on my face. And that's something I'm pretty comfortable with as an athlete. And I think it's enabled me to have outstanding, brilliant results as well. Mm-hmm. But as a coach, sometimes coaches don't like athletes that their results are literally a roller coaster ride. Right. And if you want a more consistent athlete that is always going to be middle of the pack, that's probably not me.
Right. Well, and I find it, I'm a data nerd, but I find it surprising that as a coach, you would say that without, if somebody says, I think you're too old and here's a report that proves that, or the logic or science behind it. But if it's more just by gut feel, I think you're too old, and I don't really see how that helps anybody. But
I mean, I think, again, this goes back to unconscious decision-making, unconscious bias, not looking at cold, hard data. But honestly, I know you're a data nerd, and I really appreciate that. I am too. But you can take statistics and take data and put them in a lot of different ways and make a case a lot of different ways with quote-unquote data.
That's fair enough.
Slippery slope.
Yeah. I'll say back to that a good data analyst will do due diligence to make sure that the data of the end result shows what the data shows. But there's always going to be, again, gray areas. Should probably be the name of the podcast. But no, I don't know. I have faith in you that you will prove them wrong.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it's I really like the fact that people look at an age in the first place. If you're, as a group of coaches, or if you're focused on results, then age shouldn't matter.
Yeah, no, I mean, it shouldn't be and isn't included in many teams discretionary positions, but here we go back to like star making, right? Like if you have a 19-year-old who has like this one amazing result and you think, gosh, like they have so much potential, they're going to be like the face of USBA or Norwegian biathlon or German biathlon, like it's exciting, right? Like they might be the next Jordan Dahl, and they, and the reality, the data is that people who hit their peak younger have longer careers at that peak. I mean, that's just business. But I think like looking only at those numbers and not the fact that most of the biathletes in the US come from post-college or people who have had significant breaks in their career. And also the fact that like I was at a high level, it just was a different sport. Unfortunately, like it's hard to quantify those strange variables. Whereas in the German system and the Norwegian system, you have many individuals who started biathlon when they were 12 or 14, shooting with, 22. Like they've done air rifle before, but they've started, competing with a 22 when they were 14. And they've been doing biathlon ever since. It's a lot easier to say like, yeah, by the time you're, 28, if you haven't ever had any fantastic results, maybe you won't have any more.
Right.
Like maybe you aren't going to get there. But if you have a population of athletes, myself included, that have just not ever had consistent biathlon coaching and consistent biathlon support throughout their career, it's really, really hard to figure out the potential of an athlete, but also figure out when they're going to hit their quote unquote peak.
Right. Yeah. No, and it's, we talked about so many different influences in biathlon, and if from an amateur perspective, I can say if your head's not in a good space, I don't think you should expect good shooting.
Yeah, for sure.
That's for me.
We saw it we saw it with some stars at World Champs, like who obviously are incredibly good shooters, and then didn't shoot so well, and then the next week they were shooting really well. Like that is just all mental. It happens in technical sports quite often. I definitely happened in ski jumping to some athletes where you just kind of lose it for a week or two and don't really know what happened.
Yeah. And then, people start making changes and usually it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's always a slippery slope, especially with biathlon. Of like, I'm going to change something on my rifle or my range approach. And
I had one more question, because I know we've taken a lot of your time already. I find the wax fascinating now that, in biathlon we have fluorless wax and that kind of thing, but in ski jumping they also use wax, but it's really just for like a super short stretch. Is it a lot easier in ski jumping because the tracks are really consistent?
Yeah, for ski jumping, in terms of wax and the difficulty of finding good wax, it's a totally different picture. The grind on your skis has a much bigger impact on your overall speed than the actual wax you put on.
Okay. And do you see that more in cross-country skiing or biathlon skiing as well, that the grind is getting more and more attention?
I can't speak to what ski jumping is like with no fluoros, but I can't imagine it's very different. As in terms of biathlon with no fluoros, I have a totally untested scientific theory that for people who are not as strong and are lighter, it has a bigger impact because there is more resistance on your ski than there used to be. And it doesn't make as big a difference for the people who are heavier and thus have more momentum. But sliding physics is very different than rolling physics in terms of resistance. Anyway, totally untested theory that I have. Very unscientific, just observation. But I think it definitely affects people who have different skiing styles more or less, for sure. That being said, like when you have really good wax techs and they hit the wax, it still feels really fast. I think there are more days with no fluoros where wax techs try their best but don't hit the wax. That's been my experience as an athlete.
Yeah.
But it was like the first year without fluoros. So I think that's kind of expected across the board of just like, it's a science that has not been tested and isn't known as in-depth way.
Right. Well, hopefully, I don't know if you saw that I just posted an article on that. If there's some sort of evidence that hitting or missing the wax as a team can be shown through the data, but
so since I'm about to head out, the most important question I have left for you, actually I have two, and one is serious and one is not. So in listening to you talk about sport and talking about, in particular, talking about strategy for races and thinking through races and things like that, it sounds a lot like a coach. So in 10 to 15 years, when your racing days are over, have you thought about coaching?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I've also thought about like a million other things too.
Sure. Well, like what else?
I could definitely see me having more of a military career. I could see me using the military to get my helicopter's license or pilot's license. I could see going to the medical field, again, using the military to, be a physiologist or maybe even surgeon. I could see working like landscaping and farming around my house or going into the trades around my house and just like putting sport aside. The possibilities are endless. My poor boyfriend, I'm always talking to him about what I could do. And he's like, sure. I could definitely see like getting real estate around Europe and having them be income properties and spending a lot of time traveling and seeing the world.
Where in Europe? Where are your any biathlon locations?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think like Iceland, Sweden, maybe even Greenland. And like I want to go to Svalbard. It would be really cool to like be a science intern up there. Like I don't know. There's just too many options. The world is too big.
I love it. Last question. This is the much less serious one. On your Team USA athlete bio, it says that you are exceptionally good at driving monster trucks and playing cribbage. Yeah.
I think you're one of the few people to actually read that. So that's great. I was like, so here's the thing. When I fill out bios, I have spent my life like spending time and thinking about like, oh, what should I put on here? Like what makes me look interesting and fun. And maybe people don't know these things about me. And then one day I was just like, whatever, like let's just put something on there that makes people laugh.
Good. Okay. No. I was really hoping that you were going to say that like you actually had you were a monster truck enthusiast and you had one parked outside.
No, unfortunately not. Maybe one day.
Yeah.
Maybe as an environmental sciences student that's doesn't mix well.
I don't know. I mean, speaking of Lost Nation research and development, Ethan Dreisegacker had a biodiesel car that ran completely off of biodiesel for a number of years in high school and college. So,
wow!
I'm sure I have
get a biodiesel monster truck.
Yeah.
All right.
Was there anything you wanted to bring up before we go, Tara?
No, not that I can think of. I really appreciate you kind of following me through a very large collection of topics.
Yeah, no, we always love that for the pure biathlon fan, maybe they're like, oh, you don't talk about biathlon enough, but I'm more interested in the athlete behind the person, like we said, we see on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's so much more to it. So I really, really appreciate how open you've been and taking the time for us. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. This was incredibly enlightening. And like I said, I've said this a couple of times, but thank you so much for being so open and willing to discuss these topics. Like, even if they weren't necessarily the things that are going to get you the nice, happy emails. But I think it's, like I said, it's real life. I think it's worth talking about.
Well, I, again, appreciate both of your time so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you again.
Very welcome.
Yeah.
We will let you go, and I'm sure your boyfriend would It sounds like he I saw him moving back and forth in the background. Maybe he wants some help, but whatever he's working on.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. All right.
Well, we'll keep following you, and maybe we'll catch up at some point. And a lot of good luck with getting ready for the new season.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a nice evening.
Okay.
You too.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.